Thank you for joining us for this latest round of lessons brought to you by the New England First Amendment Coalition.
My name is Geoff. I'm over at Common Cause, Massachusetts, where we are really working on the front lines of our democracy. And we're in a really particular moment now where there are a variety of threats being thrown at our democracy and our democratic institutions. And we're really looking to work on the front line to make sure that we're removing barriers to public participation. And one of the important topics that we've been really digging into, I'm going to talk to you about today, and that is the opportunity to update our open meeting law in Massachusetts to guarantee a reasonable level of hybrid public access. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what has been going on, the updates that have been happening to the open meeting law, where things stand now, and where we hope things will be moving in the near future. So again, we're here to talk about the open meeting law, but in particular, we're here to talk about hybrid participation. So folks are familiar with the open meeting law already, but what's really important to note is that before the pandemic, the open meeting law required most meetings of the public bodies to be held in public. What this really meant was in person, that there was a physical room, people would come together in physical proximity. And so really a lot of public meetings are happening kind of in the physical space. The open meeting law established rules that the public bodies must follow in the creation and maintenance of records relating to those meetings. But really important to today's discussion, the open meeting law had timely posting of meeting notices. It required in-person quorum. That's really important. It sets guidelines for deliberation and public participation. And it also, as folks know, it mostly applies to municipal bodies and statewide boards and commissions. That's really important to just keep in mind. However, something happened in 2020 that impacted all of our lives in a huge way. And that, of course, was the COVID-19 pandemic. What happened, if you recall, was in the midst of great uncertainty and concern, there was a huge reaction in the need for people to isolate and not be around each other physically. And of course, this had a profound impact on how our government was operating, how people were watching government, how people were engaging with government, and in this space, how people were reporting on government and communicating what was going on by government bodies to the public. And so something really interesting happened, and that was that in a much larger emergency order in early 2020, former Governor Baker included language that allowed public bodies greater flexibility in utilizing technology to conduct meetings subject to the open meeting law. So what we saw really was, and this is important language to use, we saw an exemption offered under the open meeting law for bodies to conduct their business remotely, online, like we are now, using whether it's online programs like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or other. And it was a really great solution at the time to make sure that government could still function and the public could still engage with their government while we were in the midst of a pandemic which required isolation and all of us to stay usually at home. So that was a temporary exemption offered, but then the legislature soon later passed, and Governor Healy now recently signed an extension to the exemption, which is now scheduled to expire March 30th in 2025. So what do the exemptions do? There's two really important points here I want to make sure folks are aware of. First, the exemption allowed public bodies to provide a, quote, adequate alternative means, end quote, of public access to the deliberations of a public body. So instead of holding meetings in a public place that was open and physically accessible to the public, they took adequate and alternative means to also include, without limitation, providing public access through telephone, internet, or satellite-enabled audio or video conferencing, or any other technology that enables the public to clearly follow the proceedings of the body in real time. The second exemption was that any or all members of the public body may participate in that meeting remotely. So on one hand, you see that there's a remote access for the public, but on the other hand, there's also remote access for the people on the government body or board or commission. The open meeting law exemption changed the requirement for a quorum and allowed that a quorum of the body and the chair, which used to have to be physically present, that could be suspended. So quorums could now count online as well. So these were really important, but again, it's important to note that they're temporary. They're set to expire in March of 2025. As we'll talk about, this was a huge win, not just to help get us through a pandemic, but really the win was that it removed long-standing barriers to participation for groups who, under the existing system, have been long shut out. Notably and really important to us and our coalition partners, people with disabilities, the elderly, folks with limited access or no access to transportation, folks who might have to work second shift or two different jobs, or folks who are young parents with kids who otherwise just it's hard to get out physically to town hall or to a statewide board or commission meeting. And so these temporary exemptions offered under the pandemic emergency order really broke down these large barriers to participation. And so for us, we're really focusing on opportunities to make sure that hybrid public meeting options could be adopted permanently and be a part of our new normal. So looking ahead, we are working together, Common Cause, NEFAC, and many other groups are working in coalition, really pushing for the legislature to pass a permanent update to the open meeting law. Again, we know that the barriers have been removed, but what's really important to note here and to draw a distinction around is that the emergency order grants an exemption. What that means and how that looks right now is that it's simply allowing different government bodies subject to the open meeting law the discretion to opt out of the original language to have an in-person meeting only. And if they choose, they could offer instead remote options, or what we're really passionate about, which is hybrid options, which is basically a public meeting that's both got an in-person component and the remote option to participate. What we're seeing now, unfortunately, is as different municipalities under the open meeting law or different state boards and commissions under the open meeting law, they're now using that discretion, and we're starting to see folks revert back to pre-pandemic norms. And unfortunately, what that does is it starts to shut the door on the folks who have been granted this new level of access under the pandemic emergency order. And so across the board, it's widely agreed upon that remote participation should be enshrined in our open meeting law's new normal. However, there's really two different ways that people are advocating for this, and I want to make sure folks are aware. The first is there's an effort to enshrine the current language that would permanently allow but not require government bodies to offer remote participation options. What we're really passionate about, and I'll explain it in the last slide next, is we really think that it's important that the law be updated to guarantee hybrid meeting options, both remote and in person, for government bodies subject to the open meeting law, to make sure that there's a level of requirement for public meetings to be hybrid. The reason for this is really because, as we're seeing now, people are starting to get shut out. What one person calls, discretion of a government body, someone else could very legitimately call disenfranchisement. And so one thing that we're really concerned about at Common Cause is if you offer broad discretion for how a meeting will be conducted under the open meeting law, you're going to see some municipalities or state boards and commissions choosing to offer hybrid options, and you're going to see others choosing to deny hybrid options. And what it would do for the first time in over 50 years is subject to the open meeting law to becoming a patchwork and looking differently and having a different standard of guaranteed access for the public based on your zip code or where you live. And we just think that really undermines the spirit of the open meeting law, but it also enables people being shut out of the process. So where are we at? Well, the legislature has a variety of options to consider, either to codify the existing exemption or to go a step further, an important step further, and really pass legislation to update the open meeting law to guarantee hybrid options. Common Cause and our coalition partners across the state are really excited about legislation called an Act to Modernize Participation in Public Meetings. On the House side, it's House Bill, actually, this is a typo. It's House Bill 3040. I apologize for that. filed by Rep. Garlick, and Senate Bill 2024, filed by Senator Lewis. And those propose to require that all bodies subject to the open meeting law shall offer hybrid participation options, meaning both in-person and remote, which we think is the best of both formats, to maximize the ability for the public to observe and participate in public meetings. We believe strongly in these bills because we think that the open meeting law in this new normal should be updated, but should also be done so in a way that's consistent across all 351 municipalities and in a way that leaves no one behind. So we're really passionate about this. We know right now the legislature has legislation pending, particularly before the Joint Committee on State Administration and Regulatory Oversight. There's a lot of support for guaranteeing hybrid public meetings in the House and in the Senate. And we're really looking forward to, in the next few weeks before the end of legislative session, trying to support the House and Senate passing meaningful legislation that would offer this guarantee. You'll see on the right here, we've also had a lot of support from the press. The press actually has a prominent role in our coalition, particularly through the Massachusetts Publishers Association, also our partners here at NEFAC, who are well represented. But you'll see everyone from the Boston Globe, Eagle Tribune, and other outlets at the local and regional level have been authoring editorials in support of guaranteeing hybrid public meetings. Not only is it a big win for the public at large, but it's a really big win for reporters and folks who care about directly communicating what's going on in government, even at the local level, to the public who might otherwise not be able to watch or participate. And so there's a really important opportunity here for the press to win by guaranteeing hybrid public meetings across the board. So we're excited about where things are headed. We still have a lot of work to do. And again, we're really hopeful that guaranteed hybrid public meetings will be a permanent fixture in our open meeting law here in Massachusetts moving forward.
Oh, Rob Birchie has a great question. If the meeting is hybrid, must the remote segment be recorded and preserved?
Yes, Rob, good question. So part of the language in the bill that we are supporting would also call for the preservation and public posting of the video and audio. So great question. So in addition to what now is required, which are meeting minutes being posted usually in text, a Word doc or a PDF, yeah, in this bill, it would also call for the preservation of the video and audio.
All right, so Richard Lodge, all right, has a great question. Does the bill put a time frame on when video should be available after a meeting? Good question.
Great question. The answer is yes. I just don't remember off the top of my head what the language says, but I know we had talked about that as a coalition and wanted to make sure we were encouraging the bill sponsors to put such a requirement in. So I could probably send that information, Emily, if that makes sense, back, Richard, or if you like, you could probably read it in the bill itself. And I'm happy before the call ends to put a link to the bill in the chat if that's helpful.
All right, and Lindsay has a question. Says, this is a tough question, but have you noticed a change in folks' candidness in meetings in response to these laws or measures? Or has any of that faded with time?
This is a really good question, Lindsay, that I don't know that I as an individual have the answer to. We have benefited from many stories that we've heard from folks who are engaged in public meetings kind of at large, that things tend to be normal in terms of people not necessarily being more reserved. What we have talked about as a coalition, which is why we landed on wanting hybrid, was that there are a lot of pluses with remote, but there's also some minuses, right? If you're a reporter or if you're a community organizer, sometimes there's an advantage to being physically in a room or being able to maybe pull an elected official to the side after a meeting and ask them a question or do some follow-up advocacy. And so there's really a lot of pluses for the in-person and a lot of pluses for the remote. That's why we landed really on saying we think hybrid makes the most sense so that you can get the benefit of both and making sure you're really putting the discretion for how to engage in the hands of the public and not leaving it in the hands of the government body. Because as we know from the past is, unfortunately, there are opportunities where the government body will use the tools it has in the toolbox to be less accessible. But no, to the spirit of your question, we haven't seen folks really kind of maybe reducing their candidness. Cindy's got a good question. Could executive sessions be recorded too? No, so there's no proposed change to the current open meeting law, which allows for bodies to meet in a private executive session. So no, the bill doesn't propose including any video recordings of those.
And we have another question, and actually a comment from Richard Lodge, my old boss. Says, to your point, I'm concerned that some reporters rely on doing meetings online from the comfort of their kitchen table, but lose the connection with city, town officials and can't grab an official immediately after a meeting to get questions. And yeah, Geoff, we were talking about that too. There's nothing like being there in person. And Richard, you're absolutely right. Getting, being able to, feel the crowd, interview people who attended the meeting afterwards, being able to like corner an official afterwards to get an answer. It's nothing. Yeah, it definitely hybrid or remote doesn't really replace that at all. I think being in person is always the ideal. Geoff, I don't mean to.
Yeah, I'd love to just reflect on this. And Richard, this is, I think, this is what we're really aiming to do with really a new version of the open meeting law, a stronger version of the open meeting law, is putting the ability to choose how the public engages. And so, I would agree, right? If you want to go in the room and be physically present, you might get better, answers to your questions if you're a journalist, or you might have more impact on an elected official if you're their constituent and you're talking to them face to face. There's something there that certainly benefits the work we care about. At the same time, that there's someone very passionate about what the government body might be discussing who can't physically get into the building, right? And so they also have that option to be heard and to engage in the process as well. And so we really think hybrid lands on a win-win. And we really do think, and I just want to reiterate, it's really important that legislation be passed that requires hybrid options. We are really nervous that if you're giving the option or discretion, that what you'll see is, with political will varying, you'll see different government bodies or different municipalities, offering hybrid options and others not. And so it really could damage the open meeting law if you're going to start to remove the standard and remove a set level of guaranteed access to government happenings for all residents in the Commonwealth, if you're going to leave it up to the discretion of the body. Because if you're giving discretion to the body, what you're saying is they could choose to offer remote meetings, but on the flip side, they could also choose to deny people the access that we know after the pandemic removed these longstanding barriers.
Brian said to you, Geoff, it seems that Senate 2011 or House 3025 would continue remote meetings, but hybrid would be optional. I volunteer for a local cable access station that supports keeping hybrid/remote as it benefits all populations. S 2024 House 3040 has more co-sponsors and made excellent points at the joint committee meeting. Geoff, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, so this is similar, and Brian, thanks for that note. And just thanks for the work you do at local cable access. That's been hugely important to this conversation, especially getting us through the pandemic. There's a distinction here that's important, and that is the current emergency order that expires in March of 2025, and efforts to simply codify this emergency order. If you maintain discretion, you're going to have government bodies that choose to not offer it for whatever reason that they would like. And we know that that level of discretion will lead to disenfranchisement. We know that some people will be cut out. We're already starting to see it now. We're starting to see at the local level, whether it's select boards or school committees, starting to say, all right, well, if the pandemic's quote unquote over, then we can go back to in-person only, and we don't have to worry about putting our meetings on Zoom. And as you can tell and anticipate, there are people in that jurisdiction who may rely on remote access or the Zoom access, and who are now being shut out. And so we really think that, there's a need for some reasonable guarantee. We've heard concern from folks who advocate on behalf of municipalities around logistics and cost. How are you going to require us to do hybrid meetings? And that's a concern we're respectful of. The good news is there's a lot of federal money over the last few years, both through ARPA, but also through the bipartisan infrastructure bill that Congress passed a few years ago, directly earmarked for broadband equity and investing in modernizing our online infrastructure. We really think this is a good opportunity for municipalities to do it. We've already seen roughly after a study we did about a year ago now, alongside our partners at the ACLU, we found out already at the local level, whether it be city council or select board or school committee, about 50% of municipalities are already offering hybrid access. Not because they have to, because they've invested in the infrastructure and they've made it possible. And so, we're mindful of the concern, but we're really hopeful that part of the conversation can be about what do the municipalities need in order to do this. But we're really, really concerned that if there's only discretion in the open meeting law moving forward, people will be shut out.
And Rob Birchie has another good question. You mentioned the citizens' ability to comment and to have their heard, but there's nothing in the OML, aka open meeting law, that requires that public participation be allowed, is there?
Spot on, Rob. So the bill wouldn't change that at all. This is where when a municipality or when a board or commission at the statewide level, when they're offering public input. And so I know, and folks probably know this, the Attorney General's office already encourages maximizing public participation. And so, this wouldn't change that. It would, however, say if and when a government body has public participation, that part of the offerings be remote and in-person access together. So yes, you are totally spot on there.
Ryan asks, don't SO 2024 and H 3040 have a hardship clause with time to get up to speed?
Brian, I promise Brian and I don't know each other, but you're setting me up for a really good lead. Thank you. Yes. So one thing that's built in to the bills that we're supporting is a hardship waiver for municipalities. If they have an economic hardship that they can apply, the bill proposes over 5 years annually for a waiver so that they wouldn't have to immediately comply if the legislature were to pass a new law. It's not indefinite, but it's trying to. That was a way that I know the sponsors felt was important to accommodate if there was a municipality that wanted to do it but needed some time to build resources and capacity to get there, to make sure that that was respected. So it's a compromise that's written into the bill, and thank you for flagging that. We think it's an important one.
Catherine asks, does the open meeting law require meeting minutes to be transcribed? Would accessibility increase with the update you're advocating for?
This is a really good question. And I just want to make sure I'm getting it right. Catherine, are you asking if we were to have an update that had video, if part of the video would include a transcription, not just audio, in terms of accessibility? No worries. I just want to make sure that that's what I was hearing. So I can get back to you if helpful. I actually don't know if that's written into the bill. But I will say we're very proud that in our steering committee is the Disability Law Center, Boston Center for Independent Living, other centers for independent living, who are really helping to champion and lead the opportunities for this permanent update to the open meeting law in terms of benefiting people with disabilities in particular. And this seems like a really good idea, but I don't know the answer if it's written into the bill yet. But certainly something, if a bill were to pass and there were to be subsequent advocacy around setting, regulations, that's something we want to highlight as well, for sure.
One more question we have from Sophia asking, have there been government bodies that have explicitly stated an unwillingness to go hybrid/remote unless required by law?
So this is a tricky one. So there is a message we've heard, I know, especially that was present when the legislature had a public hearing on these different bills. A narrative we heard coming from some municipal leaders was, we really like remote access, but don't force us to do it. And I think in the most of the folks in the room, most municipalities represented were already doing some version of remote or hybrid access, but they were really pushing to kind of have the legislature stop short of requiring that municipalities do this. So that said, there hasn't been that specific municipality that stood up and said, we're not doing this. And so it's a tough space to kind of, thread the needle, because I think that across the board, there is a huge appreciation for this new level of access. I think the concern that we're hearing, especially from folks advocating on behalf of municipalities, is we like the option, but we don't want to be forced to do it. We're taking that important step and we're advocating, saying there needs to be some reasonable guarantee. Maybe it's not every single body under the open meeting law. Maybe it's the more consequential ones. Maybe it's the city councils and the school committees, but not so much a volunteer ad hoc parade committee. But we know there needs to be some guarantee, because again, if not, then there's an opportunity to shut people out. And so the spirit of the open meeting law, as folks probably know very well over the last 50 plus years, has always been to ensure a standard level of access for the public across the board, and to make sure that government was accountable to doing their business in the open. And so we're nervous if we were simply to see legislation pass that gives that discretion, that will have some municipalities that are opting to close their doors and others that are keeping them open. And we really don't think that that's the best for the open meeting law. I'll just say to Rob, who's shouting out my
Yeah.
PC Boys poster, Rob, you got to fight for your right to participate in open meetings with hybrid format. Well, thank you again to NEFAC. Emily, thanks so much for this great time together. Thanks everyone on the call for the important work you do. Again, while we're fighting for hybrid meeting access, it's important to put it in the context of, defending democracy. And the more people can directly interface with their government, whether at the federal or state or local level, the more people have the information, the facts, to be informed residents, to be informed voters. And so this is a I think, small part of the larger effort. And I know so many of you, especially in the press, just do so much